So I don't work in the humanities, I work in educational technology, so I'm here talking about pedagogy rather than about humanities that I do. I'm talking about humanities that other people do. And they're not people that I work with, they're not people I know, they're people that I learn about the humanities from. And what I've been working on recently is a book called Augmented Education. So what, may you say, is augmented education? Is she going to tell us about those stupid people who wear those glasses all the time and they look really geeky? No. I'm taking a wider definition of it. So augmented reality, augmented learning, augmented education is about taking information and superimposing it on your day-to-day life. So you can do that with glasses, you can put text up in front of you or images up in front of you, but you can bring it into your lives in other ways. And I'm going to talk about how people do that within humanities and within humanities education. And I think one of the interesting things about this is a lot of this is happening in informal settings, and it shows how huge educational projects can run on a complete shoestring because they're running through personal enthusiasm and engagement. They're not running through time-limited research grants that then come to an end and a fabulous project has to be put on ice. So to give you an example of what I'm talking about, this is an example from exactly a year ago today, and this was where the idea of augmented learning was taken up by Channel 4. I mean, television programmes have taken this up, the Royal Shakespeare Company have taken this sort of thing up, and they said, let's refresh how we look at D-Day, because we've been looking at D-Day for 69 years now, as they have been last year. Let's try and bring it to life. And so they brought these 7 people to life through your Twitter stream, and throughout 6th of June last year, all these people tweeted, and they tweeted about what they were doing in their different roles. That's still all up online, you can go and see it, some of it's being retweeted today. And you got a lot of interaction with that, as you can see with this. So this is one of the biggest tweets that came out. Dixie Dean was killed, and people were really upset about Dixie Dean being killed. It got 189 retweets. A lot of people engaging with this, people saying it was really, really emotional. Well, that's just sort of transient stuff that happens in your Twitter stream and then you move on. But there was actually evidence that people were engaging with this and that they were learning from it. For one thing, people were picking up these stories and they were relating them to their own lives. So you can see that this person here had spotted, I don't know if that was their father or their grandfather, in a picture with Dixie, which was being shared online. And then this person here, a month later, actually went to France, went to Dixie's grave and put a flower on his grave. And people did that again on November the 11th. So it wasn't just a sort of transient, this happens on June the 6th. You saw that again in November, and you've seen it again this year. You know, people referred back to Dixie Dean, so they've learned something there. So that's sort of an example of what I mean by putting information into people's day-to-day lives. That's where you'd go to look for your information if you're a social media person. You'd go and look at your Twitter, your blogs, your Face stream, see what's going on, and these things from the past started coming up. So some of the advantages that you get with augmented learning are very similar to the ones you get with social presence. And for those of you who don't know anything about social presence, it's the giving people the impression that a mediated experience isn't mediated. So it's what makes you think you're having a conversation with somebody when you're really talking to a telephone. It's what makes you shout at a footballer on the television even though you know that they can't hear you. So there's lots of good things about social presence which come in this sort of context. These are some that I've pulled out, and you can see how some of these relate to what I was just showing you about D-Day. You're getting a social response. People knew that Dixie was no longer alive. They knew all those people weren't alive, but they were responding to it. They were interacting. They saw it as warm and personal and immediate. They developed an emotional response. They were encouraged to get involved, and they got a sense of togetherness. And I think you see that if you look at Twitter today with the D-Day 70 tweets, people are sort of seeing parallels between what happened in the past, what happened now. I've just looked at a reef photo where somebody has put a Normandy beach today with people with bucket and spade, and then they've superimposed the troops coming in on that. I think this pulls together a new sort of educator, a sort of educator that we've not seen before. somebody who's not necessarily seeing themselves as an educator, but does have a role in teaching and learning. They've got long-term interests and personal enthusiasm which motivates them to do something online. They've got to have some expertise, but they've also got to have the time and ability to be a coordinator and a facilitator, to bring people together and to inspire and engage people, because nobody has to engage, nobody has to turn up. Once they've turned up, nobody has to stay. And if at any point they get bored, they go away again. But yet some of these people can keep people engaged for 10, 11, 12 years. So they must be doing something right from the point of view of teaching and learning. So this is the first example I want to show you. This is Pepys' diary. The guy who runs Pepys' diary, Phil Gifford, got the idea of putting one entry for Samuel Pepys' diary up every single day for as long as it ran, and he did that for 9 years. And that brought a lot of benefits. It brought a huge amount of engagement in of people who just pop in and see what Samuel Pepys had been doing that day, and then might comment on it, and might provide a glossary, and might provide some extra information about it, and discuss it, and ask questions about it, and learn with it. So all the advantages that you get from Web 2 about distributed expertise, and about collaboration, and about being able to cooperate together and ask people, began to form around Pepys' diary. So for example, I showed you that one because that was a very short entry. These are just some of the annotations that has gleaned. It's had 43 annotations just that one day. And if you look here, this one was in May 2004. The project was so successful that once he'd been all the way through, he started again. So in 2014, people began adding to that. And then you got two fractures across time, because people were talking about what happened in the 1660s, but they were also responding to what happened 10 years ago. And they were answering questions that people hadn't been able to answer 10 years ago. They were coming back and answering that. So you can see people looping through and engaging over this huge period of time. And you can also see people beginning to build up some sort of emotional engagement over this time, and to see this on a human level. So this is Samuel Pepys, one of his tweets. He tweets a lot, and the tweets come directly from his diaries. And then here's a couple of responses. Now, one of the things I think is interesting about that is that they're calling him Sam. They're not calling him Mr. Pepys or Samuel Pepys or something. He's a person in their Twitter stream. And another thing they know is they know how he is around women. Now, that's not something you learnt at school. You learnt about him burying his cheese in the garden. You learnt about him in the Great Fire of London. You didn't learn about what he did with women. So this person has been following this. And they know that he's married as well, and they have an idea about what his wife would be thinking about this. So you can see that people are learning from this. We get some evidence of what's going on there. And this is one of the comments. Overall, I think he had 58,000 annotations on this by 2012, once he'd gone through once. And he has about 100,000 people who've come in and followed it. So a lot of engagement from around the world. And somebody here sort of pulling out what you get from seeing this as a Web 2 experience, rather than what you see in getting it from a book. So they're not saying, don't ever go and look at books. They're saying you get something different from doing it in this sort of a way. Now this is another project. This project is running for the first time at the moment. It's retweeting World War II. It's not doing it in one person's voice, it's doing it in the voices of a lot of people from around the world. And as Alwyn Collinson, who actually does it, says here, he's not just following one person through, he's not seeing what they said at the time necessarily, he's pulling out what we now know to be significant and following up on that. And by doing that, he's getting people to engage all around the world. So for example, these two came up into my Twitter stream. I actually found these very upsetting when they appeared in my Twitter stream. They're not nice tweets. And they came up 24 hours, I think 24 hours apart. So that gave me time to sort of think about this and then to think about that. And this one came with a photo of Inska, which gives you a sense of how many people were murdered in just that one atrocity. It wasn't just those 78 children, they were the last ones. And also it gave you a sense of that is all we know about those people because their records were destroyed. You don't know the names of any of those people who were killed, their backstories, their relations. That's it. And that's something that was obviously picked up. 163 people retweeted it, it was favourited, people discussed that. And so you get sort of low-level engagement, as you do with Send Me Your Peeps. People retweet it, people favourite it. There's obviously things that they engage with and things that they don't engage with. But there's other people who take it up in different ways. Because one of the things that he does through being selective is he takes us to events which are really significant today. So he's recently been doing things around Ukraine, he's done things around Iraq, things that when you see them in your Twitter stream, the first time round you think that's contemporary, and then you think, no, that's not contemporary, that's 70 years ago. And then you begin to see the parallels between what's happening today, and you begin to see the roots of what's happening today, or what was happening a bit further back. So this is just one that he tweeted, and then Atheist Punk and Peter Sinnott came back on it, and were considering it and reflecting on it. So one of the things that we like to see in teaching and learning is people reflecting on what they've learned. And another evidence that people are really engaging with this and trying to learn from it is how many times it's been taken up around the world. So these are just some of the times it's been translated into different languages. Sometimes I think it's directly translated into other languages, sometimes they do it selectively, sometimes they begin to do it in their own sort of context. So I can't read all those, I can't tell you if they're translating or not. But what I can tell you is, for example, this one's got 2,700 followers. So there are followers all around the world who think this is a really interesting way of engaging. So those are two big, long-term, informal learning projects which nobody has to engage with. So can we take that into formal education? Well, Chris Leach is a primary school teacher, and I think he's achieved this. So he's, for several years, done the gunpowder plot with his primary school children. And the first year, they just tweeted as Robert Catesby, who led the gunpowder plot. And they took it through several weeks, you know, setting up the plot, what happened on the day, what happened afterwards. They didn't go quite up to the execution, they're quite young children. But they followed that through. And then the next year, they added more characters to the plot, and more characters, and more people began to join in. Other schools joined in, other teachers joined in, parents came in, people like me who were outside came in. And you began to get a sort of multi-layered narrative about what was happening. I mean, I think usually when we do the gunpowder plot at school, we do it in one day, we do it for half an hour or so, and you get a sense of somebody standing in the basement with big piles of gunpowder. You get no sense about why they were doing that, or what happened before, or what happened afterwards. So this is beginning to build this up, but not just for the children, but also for the people who are engaging with it online. So I've gone one way there. So these are just some of the comments which came up afterwards. You can see that some of them are from teachers, some of them from outsiders, but they're all saying that they've learned something from this, and that by thinking it through over time, because these projects ran for sort of 2, 3, 4 weeks, they began to pick up more on the story and what was happening in history. So all the examples up till now have been history. I'll just take you over into literature, because I did a degree in English, so I can read Middle English literature, and I find these hysterically funny. If you didn't do Middle English, you'd probably find it just rather mysterious. However, Bradley Bryant, who did this and has written a book about it, tweets and blogs as Geoffrey Chaucer, and he mashes up what is happening today with what happened in Chaucer's life. He follows Chaucer's timeline to some extent, but he does go off on sort of flights of fantasy about the drug-fueled trip he crossed across the United States with King Richard. But it all sort of links into learning about Middle English, learning that Middle English is a language that people communicated in, that they had the same sort of emotions and feelings and interests that people do today. It's not just something that you do in a book that's really boring. It's They were real interesting people who had feuds and relationships and things going on in their lives. And again, this gets people engaging. This is just Chaucer telling us about a couple of letters which we don't have anymore, the Thorn and the Yog. And people coming back saying, oh, well, I'm going to use this in my shopping list. I'm going to use this when I'm writing yoghurt in the future. I'm going to use my Thorn and my Yog. And what you see in his blog is a lot of people trying to do Middle English and working through, well, what is it that's different about Middle English and what is the same? And following up on his references, because he doesn't just reference him to himself, he references Gower. He's got a feud going on with Gower. He references Langland. Why does Langland just keep going on saying the same thing again and again? He tells us about Marjorie Kemp. I mean, how many times did you learn about Marjorie Kemp when you were doing Middle English? And so it produces lots of engagement with him. It produces people coming back again and again over time and engaging and learning and following up. And I'm just going to follow up with a very brief reference to something which is another form of augmented learning. This is an approach which I've brought here because it comes from the humanities. Practomime was actually developed by people who teach classical studies and Greek and Latin, and they see it as coming from the Homeric bardic tradition, where the bard co-creates the story with the audience based on what the audience already know, what sort of responses he's getting from the audience. He's got a framework in mind, but it's shaped together with those around it. And Practomime is essentially a sort of role-playing way of learning about subjects. They do it in science as well, but it originated with teaching Latin, teaching Greek, teaching the classics. They've got 2-year-long courses that you can do online if you want to do it. They do it in classrooms, they do it online. It's a commercial venture, so it's not like the other ones that I was talking about, they're very open and free and things like that. But if you're interested, follow up the Pericles group. They've got some really interesting stuff. I'm working through a Latin course at the moment. That's me after 6 months of learning Latin. You can see, if you can read bad Latin, that there's Latin in there, that there's philosophy in there, that there's a sort of mash-up of what's going on today and that's what's going on in the past. And that everything that you learn in your Latin or Greek or whatever you're learning then relates to what you have to do next in the role-playing. So to move on in the role-playing, you've got to learn these things. And it's not just sitting down with a book and going, well, I've got to learn the imperfect tense today. Can't be bothered. It's like, I need to know it because then this is going to happen. I've got to go and find out what's happening in Rome and Britain, because if I don't know what's happening in Rome and Britain, they're going to seize us as slaves, and they're going to seize the whole group. So you've got to keep going, and you've got to push on. And yeah, it's one of the pedagogies which I'd say is a new pedagogy, which is coming out of the humanities. So just to take you back very, very quickly, roles of the educator. I see different roles of the educator emerging from augmented learning these days. And I think these are things that we can take up to some extent in formal education, and we can think about how we can achieve these things within formal education. And as I said, it came out of my book. You probably can't afford the book. Order it from your library. Hey! I've got some handouts. An individual's world can be augmented with information that goes beyond the single person, goes beyond your teacher, goes beyond even a group of teachers. You can augment your environment with the experience of multiple others, and that can really enhance teaching and learning worldwide. So that's me. Thank you.
Thank you.